All right, so how did you get on with today's project? Hopefully it went really well and you're just here to see how I did it. As I mentioned before, it's really useful when you're trying to create a large project to break it down into smaller pieces so that you can tackle each of the pieces one by one. And a great way of doing that is by creating your own flowchart. So as I've shown you before in the end of the last lesson, this is the flowchart that I've created for this particular program. And I'm going to follow it step by step to create this final blind auction program. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to show the logo from this file art.py, and notice how this logo is stored inside a variable called logo. So the first thing we have to do is to fork our own copy of the starting project, and then we're going to look inside the art.py module, and then we're going to import that logo. So now I can go ahead and print my logo, not Lolo. So that's the first step done. Next, we're going to ask for a name. So that's going to be in the form of an input. So let's go ahead and create a variable called name, and we're going to set it to be an input. And the input is going to say, what is your name? So they're going to type in the name, and that's going to be stored inside this variable. Now, the next thing we're going to do is ask them for their bidding price. We'll save that inside a variable called price, and we'll create another input to ask them, what is your bid? And at the end of this, I'm going to add a $sign, just so that when they are typing their bid, they'll see this line, and when they start typing, the cursor should be about here, so they can see the dollar symbol before their price. So now we're down to here, and we have to add our name and our bidding price into a dictionary. Let's go ahead and create it up here, and we'll call it bids, and it's going to start out as an empty dictionary. And then later on, once we've got the name and the price, we said that the name was going to be the key and the price was going to be the corresponding value. To add a new entry to our bids dictionary, we specify the dictionary, we add a set of square brackets, and then we add the key. The key is going to be the name, and the value is going to be the price. So we would write it like this. Now we get on to the slightly trickier part. We're going to ask if there are any other users who want to bid. And if the answer is yes, then we're going to clear the screen and we're going to loop back to where we're asked for the next name and the next bid price. How do we achieve this? Well, we can put this into a while loop. Let's go ahead and indent this. So I just typed command and then the right-sided square bracket, or on Windows it will be control and the right-sided square bracket. And then we can wrap this into a while loop. If we had some sort of variable that would keep track whether if the bidding is finished, so let's call it bidding finished. And of course it starts out being false. Now, while bidding is not finished, so while not bidding finished, so basically while this is still false, then we're going to keep running this until forever. But of course, we need a way to stop this. So we're going to create a new input where we ask the user, are there any other bidders? Type yes or no. This way, we get to get an input, which is going to be either the word yes or the word no, and we can save this inside a variable called maybe should continue. So this way, we can check this variable, and we can see, well, if should continue is equal to no, well, in that case, that's when we're going to flip the switch and change this bidding finished variable to true. So this means that when we get to the end of this block in the while loop, then when it checks this bidding finished, it's not going to continue to loop anymore. Now, on the other hand, if should continue was yes, or in fact any other value, then we can keep continuing and we don't actually have to change this variable because it's already false. Now we have our code looping, which means that unless the user types in a no at the very end, and bidding becomes finished, this is this path. Otherwise, then we're going to keep going through all of these lines of code, which is basically all of this, until we get to the point where this switch actually gets flipped. So if you notice that if the user actually answers yes, then we want to clear the screen before we repeat the loop. That means we can check to see, well, elif should continue is equal to yes. Well, in this case, we're going to call that clear function that I showed you in the hint at the very beginning. So this function comes from the replit module and allows us to clear the output in the console so that the previous name and bid gets cleared off the screen and it leaves a fresh start for the next user. The last thing we have to do is to actually address this, right? So when they answer no, they get taken out of the while loop, but we still have to find the highest bidder from our dictionary and to declare them as the winner. How do we do this? Well, let's put this in a separate function. So we could create a new function called find highest bidder. And this is going to get the bidding record as the input. So this will be the dictionary that represents all the bids, the names and the values. I think it's easier if we can visualize what this bidding record might look like. So we know it's a dictionary of key value pairs where each key is a name and each value is a number. So let's say we had only two bidders, Angela and James. Angela bid $123, James bid $321. So we can see who's clearly going to be the winner here. But how do we get our code to figure that out? We need to somehow loop through this dictionary, right? Which is called bidding record. We know that we can use a for loop to do this. So we can say for each bidder in the bidding record, not bidden record. And this is a good point to remember that when you use a for loop on a dictionary, instead of looping through each item in the dictionary, like each of these key value pairs, it actually loops through each of the keys. And we covered this in the very first lesson of today, where we talked about how the for loop works when we're looping through a dictionary. Now we're going to get hold of each of the bidders inside this dictionary. So what do we do with it? Well, we want to use the key to get the value. Let's take the bidding record and pass in the key, and this should give us the value. So now we can actually save this inside a variable, which I'm going to call bid amount. So the first time this for loop runs, the bid amount is going to equal to 123. And the next time the for loop runs, the bid amount is going to be equal to 321. If we had some sort of way outside of the for loop that keeps track of the highest bid, well, then we could use this number to check against the current bidding amount. We can use an if statement to check, well, if the bid amount is greater than the highest bid, well, in that case, then the highest bid becomes the bid amount. So what this means is that we start out with a 0. The first time the for loop is run, the bidder is going to be equal to Angela. The bid amount is going to be equal to Angela as the key passed into this dictionary, which is going to get us the value 123. If 123 is greater than 0, well, then this highest bid is now going to become 123. The next time the for loop runs, the bidder is now James and the bid amount is now 321. Now we're checking if 321 is greater than the highest bid. Remember, this in the last round got set to 123, so this is going to be true, and this means James's bid, 321, is now going to be the highest bid. In addition to keeping track of the highest bid, we can keep track of the winner. if this is indeed true, if the current bidder has the highest bid, well then at the same time as setting the highest bid, we should also set the winner to the key, so the current bidder. And once we've gone through this for loop and we've looped through all of the records in the bidding record, well then finally we can actually print the winner is the winner that's stored in this variable. And we're going to say they won with a bid of, and let's add a $sign, and then we're going to pass in the highest bid. Now we can turn this into an F string, and it will use both of these variables, which is storing the highest bid and the winner's name, to print out who the winner is. So down here, when should continue is no, going down this path, we can now print and declare the winner. In addition to saying that bidding finished is true, we're also going to call that function find the highest bidder and pass in all of the bids that we have been keeping track of over here. Now, just before we run our code, let's go through each line and make sure that everything looks all right. Firstly, here where it says, what is your name? Maybe we can add a colon and then a space so that the user starts typing here. Then it asks, what is your bid? We can add a colon as well, and the user will start typing after the $sign. Now, I can already see a problem that's actually going to happen because of this line 23. I wonder if you can spot the issue here, especially if you think about what we're going to do with this price later on. But I'm going to add one more new line here, and then I'm going to run the code, and we'll see what actually happens. So now let's go ahead and run the code. And you can see our gavel printed, and then it asks us for our name. So I'm just going to put my name, and then 123, and then one other bidder who's going to be James, 321. And now if I say no, there are no more bidders, see what happens when I hit enter. I get a type error, and it tells us that the greater sign is not supported between instances of a string and an int, and this happens on line 16. If we take a look at line 16, basically we're comparing the bid amount, which is the value that came out of the bidding record, which is what's being passed in here, and that, of course, is a dictionary where the keys are the names of the bidders and the value is the price. So what's actually happening here? Well, it's because when I took this price input in, I kept it as a normal input. Instead, it should be turned into an integer. So that way we can work with it as a number, so that when we're comparing it against, say, 0 or whatever other number later on, it can actually do the comparison. It doesn't actually make sense to the computer when you're comparing a string versus a number. That doesn't actually work. And this was covered when we talked about data types in Python. Now, if we hit run again, and we do the same thing, and when I say no, you can see that it tells me the winner is James with a bid of 321. Essentially, the hardest part of this challenge is figuring out how to loop through a dictionary and get hold of each of the bidders and each of the values and compare them historically against previous values inside this dictionary. If this function is confusing to you, then I really recommend either going over to Thonny, pasting the code in, and exploring it by going through it step by step. Alternatively, if you can't install Thonny or you don't have access to your normal computer, then you can also go to a website called pythontutor.com. And this also lets you visualize your code, although in a slightly more simplified way. If I go ahead and paste in my function, find highest bidder, passing in the bid record, let's go ahead and create a new dictionary of bids. So now we have a dictionary of bids with two key value pairs, just as we entered before. And then I'm going to call this function find highest bidder, and pass in these bids. Now, if we go ahead and click Visualize Execution, you can see it's going to go line by line, and we can click Next to see how it's jumping through this. Firstly, it's bypassing this function, creating this next dictionary. So now it's got a function stored somewhere, which is this one. It's got a dictionary called bids stored somewhere else. And now we actually get to the line which is going to execute that function. And it's going to pass over this dictionary of bids to this function. And if you step through this line by line, you can see it creating these new variables and populating them. The first time we run it, the highest bid is 0. The winner is an empty string. And the bidder in the for loop is now Angela. It's the first key from the dictionary, as it points to here. Now, if we keep clicking next, it works out the bid amount, which is the value corresponding to that key. And then it works out the highest bid by comparing whether if the current bid amount is greater than the current highest bid. So 1, 2, 3 is greater than 0. So when I click next, you'll see highest bid gets replaced with the bid amount. And the winner is now going to be set as Angela. The next time the for loop runs, the bidder is now James. And if I keep going through this, you can see that James actually ends up with the highest bid and becomes the winner. So now the for loop is done because it's looped through all items in the dictionary, and it's now going to print the output, which is the winner is James with a bid of 321. This is another way that's really, really helpful to visualize your code. And the other great thing is that even if while you're visualizing, there's still something you don't understand, you can actually click on this button to get live help from users across the internet. And if you want to practice your own debugging, just as we did in today's lesson, you can also click to help some of these users who are looking for help with their code. And you can practice reading code, understanding code, and helping other people with their bugs and their issues. Finally, if you want to take a look at the completed code for today's project, then as always, you can head over to replit/@apiary/blind auction completed. And it's important to remember that this is just one way of completing this project. There are lots and lots of other ways. But as long as you test your program thoroughly and it works in the same way, then it doesn't matter too much how you've done it. But it's important that you've absorbed the knowledge in today's lessons. And the most important of which is this concept of dictionaries, adding to dictionaries, and also looping through dictionaries. So have a look through the completed code and also have a play around with Python Tutor, which is a really great resource for your learning. And I'll see you tomorrow for more lessons on Python.